about my music.
Well, they're perfect and succinct. Thank you so much, Carter, for your time and for talking today. I really appreciate it. I'm such a huge fan of your work, so it's a real honor.
Thanks.
So to start, I'd love to, well, first I'd like to mention to any listeners, is you do a great job of like putting everything on your website and kind of chronicling your career. So I'm sorry if you're going to be repeating stuff, but I mean, I read all those notes too.
Oh, good.
And they're so in-depth and great. But for anybody who doesn't know, I'd love to start with your kind of your background. And you have a very unconventional path to becoming a composer, because it was kind of presented to you, the career.
That's
so,
right.
So how did that happen? How did that because I remember you were starting in animation a little bit and stuff like that. So that time of your life, what happened? What set you on this path?
Yeah, I mean, it's, I never had a particular career of any sort that I was interested in. I always enjoyed just moving from one thing to another, whatever happened to interest me. And I've always been lucky that interesting things would just appear. And certainly film scoring was never even close to something I was thinking about. But I was playing in bands in the city, in the New York City in the 80s. And just as an avocation, I think it's just something everyone in their 20s should do, is play in a band. Just keep adolescence going as long as you possibly can, yeah. Right? And one of the people I knew through that scene was Skip Leafsay. I knew that his day job was that he did sound editing for film, but didn't know anything more about it than that. We all had different day jobs. I was an animator maybe at that time, computer right. Animator. And apparently he was hired to do the Coen Brothers' first film, Blood Simple, and apparently at some point they asked him if he knew anybody who might be appropriate to do the music, and apparently he thought that my sensibilities were similar to theirs. Obviously I hadn't done a film score at that point, but right. He thought just for general sensibilities were similar. Also, even though I was playing at rock and roll clubs like CBGB's, I was playing instrumental music sometimes, so that's that was something I did, was write instrumental music. I didn't call it writing back then. I certainly didn't call it composing. But he put me together with Joel and Ethan, and I saw a couple of reels of, a very rough cut of Blood Simple. We were all basically, I don't know, like what were we, 22 years old or something? I don't even know, but yeah, 24. Anyway, it's. I had nothing to play for them really, so I saw some of what they had, went home, developed some, just what you would now call sketches, played some ideas of mine on piano, and I had some kind of synthesizer at the time, reel-to-reel tape machine, at that time I was really into tape manipulation, so playing stuff backwards and what have you. And then just brought that in a couple days later to some ideas. Some things were more like what you would expect for a movie like that, sort of a thriller. Yeah. And some pieces were not. And they lived with that for a while. I don't really know. I think they went off, may even have hired someone else. I'm not sure. But months later, I was over in Manchester, England, recording an album with some friends, and got a call from Joel and Ethan. They said they wanted me to do the music for their movie. And I was passing through New York on the way. I was heading to Tokyo to work on animation there, on an anime. And so for that week in between, we recorded Blood Simple. Basically used those same ideas I came up with like a day or two after seeing the movie, and expanded that into a score. But we didn't know how to synchronize the music to the picture or anything. We would really just say, well, I think we need about a minute and a half of this, and I put a stopwatch on the piano and I'd play. So it was, we really didn't know what we were doing. But this, it's still one of my favorite movies and one of my favorite scores. And I think there's a certain magic to not knowing what you're doing, which you can never recapture.
Yeah, you can't recapture your first ever. So.
I know. I mean, we'll see. Maybe Alzheimer's or something. I'll be able to
hit the reset button,
find my way back there. But so that's how that happened. They. All during that process, they said, this movie will probably never come out. They're very honest. There wasn't really an independent film distribution network back then. So we were making this movie, my payments were deferred payments, meaning, I would only get paid if it did come out. And they said, you're never going to get these deferred payments. This movie's never going to come out. But a year or so later, it finally started showing up in film festivals. And did get some distribution, and then other people started calling me.
Yeah, I remember that. It's always a story they say that they hired you because you're cheap too, and it's been like the story they've been saying. So, if I may ask, how much money did you get in the end of everything from that movie?
Well, I think my deferred payments were probably like $10,000, $5,000 or $10,000, something. But
yeah,
which is something.
For
but
your
then,
first
of course,
film, yeah.
you know, I mean, I get performance royalties from it, forever, which is. I was actually just talking to a young composer about that, because there are more and more film distributors who are trying to buy out
Right.
composers' performance royalties. I'm sure with SCL, you know, that's a
Yes.
thing at this moment that's very much on everyone's minds, because Netflix, Amazon, these companies want to try to own everything.
Absolutely.
Which is not a new concept, but they are.
But the exhibition will be forever.
Yeah, exactly. That's the thing. It's
not just a
really
theatrical run. It's forever for you to watch whenever.
Yeah, that's right. You know, it's a significant thing that you're giving up if you do sell those rights. It's, you know, back in the 40s, 1950s, a film would show in the theater. In the U.S., composers don't get any performance rights for theatrical distribution, so. You know, that's kind of those rights didn't mean that much back then. It would show in the theater, then it would disappear, and then maybe it would show up on television once or twice. Yeah. But we live in a world now where it's wonderful change that these films do live on forever. And so, in fact, these performance royalties are important. They support my family. So, you know, I'm going a little off topic here, but
that's.
But you know, that it's an important thing, and it has to be worked out. I don't think it should not become a standard and accepted thing to be selling that away. But how we're going to get to that point where we're not selling that, I don't know.
Yeah, absolutely. Another film early on your career that I really love was Psycho 3, which has had built up a cult following kind of since then. And I was these guys on YouTube called Red Letter Media kind of did like a rewatching all 4 Psycho movies.
Oh, right.
And your score came up as kind of the pinnacle of the third one. So that was that was again maybe like your second or third film.
Yeah, Tony Perkins was directing that. He had seen. I guess what happened was Universal wanted him to be in the Psycho 3 as an actor, right? He had no particular interest in that. It was, you know, not, you know, in a way, Psycho really kind of hamstringed his career, because he was so indelibly associated with that role. He'd done so many other things before that, but, you know, he would forever be Norman Bates after that. So he thought the one thing he could ask for was to direct it. And Universal really didn't care. You know, sure, you could direct it as long as your name's on the marquee, and, you know, Psycho 3 with Anthony Perkins. So he was directing, and he wanted some new, you know, voices as part of the process. Anyway, he'd seen Blood Simple, and it was a kind of funny thing. I got a letter from Universal Pictures in some old post office box that I rarely use, and saying, we would like to talk to you in connection with a project at Universal. I mean, I could easily have never gotten that letter, but
you could have missed that.
I called them and met with Tony in New York, and that was my first experience out here, and it was my second or third film.
Yeah, that was very early on too. But you're from New York, and you've remained in New York, and that's been a lot of composers now. I mean, they're based from all over the world, but what about New York that you love that you love so much that you stay there? You haven't made the move out to LA like a lot of other composers have.
Well, you know, it's a lot of different things. You know, I don't really want to be in the lap of the industry. You know, I like being able to go out to lunch and breakfast. You know, people don't ask me what projects I'm working on and stuff. It's not the conversation everywhere. Not every waiter is an actor or a screenwriter. You know, it's like, I do prefer that. I like the weather out there better than here. The constant blue skies and sun just really does drive me a little nutty.
Yeah, I'm from Maryland, so I do miss fall and seasons a little bit.
Yeah, exactly. And you know, I mean, this is more true then than now, that New York was, you know, just really an international cultural center where people just came from all over the world with, you know, say, just take music. there were musicians from all over the world, and you're just rubbing elbows with them on the subway and on the street all the time. And I mean, I think that's true now in Los Angeles. It wasn't so true, say, in the 80s, I don't think. But it seemed pretty obvious that back then that New York was the place to be in music. And yeah, so I just never felt really compelled. And I came out to do Psycho 3. Tony ended up doing some additional photography on it. So I was out here for maybe 3 months. Universal put me up, in a apartment, and I was a cheap date for Universal. They were like, compared to hiring Jerry Goldsmith,
right.
They could have had me on payroll for like 5 years, and it would have been cheaper than hiring Jerry Goldsmith for 3 months. And so yeah, I was here for a long time. I hung out in Burt Berman's office. He was head of music at Universal then. He showed me how it all works, what the budgets are like, how to read the trades, and really it was like an education.
Yeah.
I just basically hung out in his office, hung out around the lot.
Wow.
And by the time that was done, I really felt I had had everything that I had my complete Hollywood experience, and I really didn't want anything more.
That's amazing. So yeah, let's jump back to talking about the Coens and kind of going. I mean, that's been the kind of the big chunk of your career, and it's I love seeing directors and composers kind of stick together. I mean, of course, John Williams and Spielberg, and as a great example. How has the relationship changed over the years? How has it evolved? Has it become? I mean, do you guys have a second hand? What's the process like from those early days versus now with like Buster Scruggs? Has it changed at all? Does it change from picture to picture?
Well, we do know now how to synchronize music to picture.
You learned.
That's
good.
That's
check that off.
That's been a big step forward. Really, it has. I can't honestly say that it's changed much.
That's amazing.
Obviously the technologies have changed. They were one of the last, directors that I knew who were working on film, shooting and cutting on film, but they went digital some time ago, and my tools, my ability to do like sketches, mock-ups for them have improved because the tools have improved.
Yeah.
But the actual workflow between us, I think, other than things like that, the fact that I can actually I just send them music over the internet and they listen to it, and we still talk on the phone and still do face-to-face meetings, because music is sometimes hard to. I find it difficult if I actually try to make it all just by email and Dropbox and stuff. I do find it difficult sometimes to really know what the director is saying about it. So we still mostly are on the phone or face to face. But so I guess recently I'm saying it really just hasn't changed. I can't think of any way it's really changed that much.
So what is the process? I mean, unless it's something like maybe Inside Llewyn Davis was probably the only film that you weren't like a part of, right, in their entire career? Or were you a part of that?
Well, I was I was a part of it in that they had a conceptual framework for that film where they wanted all the music that was in the movie to be generated by instruments you saw on screen. Yeah. They didn't want any score like coming. Exactly, it's all diegetic. So so given that, and given that all the songs pre-existed, there wasn't any place for me, right? But still, I got a call from Joel saying, this whole part of the film where they're on the road and they don't play any music for 30 minutes, and it's just killing me. It's I can't stand to hear anymore just tires on the roadway, and you gotta come and help us. I said, but you don't want any score, do you? No, we don't want any score, but you gotta come and help us. Okay, so I did go over to their cutting room a couple times to say, so what is the problem exactly? What are you hoping that I can do about it?
How do I solve it?
And we would just say they're more like psychological therapy sessions. So the issue is you get bored listening to that, or you feel like this aspect of the character isn't anyway. So what I did was on that, I did actually say, okay, I don't think you want score. And it would be, imagine if there's no score in the first third of the movie, no score in the second third of the movie, you just want score to suddenly appear in the middle of it. Yeah. But I'll go home and I'll work up some ideas, things that they'll work against the scene, but they're not going to be, they wouldn't work in the film, and so that's what I did. I went home and I wrote some stuff that did what they needed to in the scenes, but scenes are one thing and a film is something different. You can't just, if you've got, especially if you've got the solid conceptual, structure of the film, and
Yeah.
you can't suddenly abandon that halfway through. I mean, I guess you could, but that's certainly not something they would do. So yeah, I used it as, I gave them basically a contrary example. I showed them this is what score would be, but you're not going to like it, and they heard it and they immediately said, "Yeah, you're right, we don't like it."
So you,
But I helped them eliminate that as a possibility.
so that you knew that what they knew what they didn't want, which is
Yeah, exactly.
That's, wow,
And
that's really interesting.
And that's, I guess that's a good thing about a relationship like this. They didn't have to like hire me. We didn't have to have a contract. We didn't have to, it was really just go
Just
over,
helping
see it. I know you're going to hate what I'm going to do, and I do it, and then they hate it, and that's a happy ending.
Yeah.
But that that can only happen in a situation like that where you have an ongoing relationship.
Yeah, and so what kind of directors are they? Because their films are so meticulously crafted down to every word, every beat, every frame is so, what they want. Does it spill down to the score too, or is that more like letting you off, no leash, and just kind of letting you do what you want to do?
Well, so it really varies enormously in answer to that question, because they do films. Llewyn Davis would be an example, or "Oh Brother, Where Art Thou," where the music's basically written into the script.
Yeah, it's all
right. Where those decisions have been made, before the film was even made. There isn't really a place for me. On "Oh Brother," there were areas that needed score, so I did make some contributions to that. But still, that's basically a film that's driven by songs that are right there in the script.
Yeah.
So that's one extreme where the music has been very carefully, planned before the film's even shot and before I'm even involved. Then there are films like Fargo where they don't have any idea what to do. Now, those are, of course, the ones that are most fun for me. I think there are directors who know exactly what they want the music to be in their films. A lot of these are directors that I admire and whose films I love, like you mentioned Kubrick would be like that, or Scorsese. But that's not necessarily, this wouldn't necessarily make them fun to work with as a composer. Right? What am I going to do if they know exactly what they want? Where's the creative opportunity for me? So with Joel and Ethan, it spans the whole that whole range of things. Sometimes I know exactly what they want, but a lot of times they have no idea, and they'll really just give the film to me, and we might discuss what the problems are. Like Fargo, the problem was, okay, we want people to believe it's a true crime and people are actually being killed when they're being killed, but we also want people to laugh. How do you get that to happen? To believe that a person actually died here, but are willing to still laugh because of the ridiculous way in which they died.
Such
the
a
ridiculous
device, opening that film like that, yeah.
So anyway, we'll discuss things like that, what the problems are. But usually they'll just hand it to me and let me go off and try to find some solution.
So just piggybacking on Fargo, which is one of my favorite scores, and so you built that score around a hymn, which was Scandinavian, or Lost Sheep, I think it was called. And you did that with True Grit too, with some hymns, and kind of built the score around. Is that an interesting thing to you, to take something that exists and build your sound palette from it? What was the process like, and what made you focus down to do that? Like, what was that decision came from?
It's a couple of things. For instance, Fargo, the Lost Sheep actually was a folk song that then became a hymn. It was developed when Norway was Christianized, I guess. It was adopted turned into a hymn. But there are two aspects, I think, to answer your question. One is that Joel and Ethan just they love folk music. I'm sure I'm not telling you anything you don't already know. They've made films that are entirely about that, right?
Yeah.
And I think that for them, if you show, when they encounter a piece of music and you could say, oh, this is an 18th century blah blah blah, or these cowboys sang this, or these fishermen sang it, that immediately gives it an authenticity for them that they just respond to. That's just them. There's also the aspect that I like doing research into music, finding new musical traditions that I didn't know about. So when I went through all those Protestant hymnals for True Grit, I do think that's interesting, and to see how okay, here's 100 hymns, but they're also different, and most of them don't work in this movie. But here's like I found a few that do. Um, I like that aspect of the job. I guess in a nutshell, I like the idea that at the end of the project, I'm smarter than I was at the beginning. So I enjoy the research, and I do think that there's something anodyne about a folk tune that has survived a couple of hundred years. There's something. There's a reason why they do. It's like natural selection has allowed that tune, to go on, and there's something special about that. And I don't feel as strongly about that as Joel and Ethan do, but I do think it's true.
Yeah.
And so if I can find one that is, simple enough that I can take off from it, but sufficiently complex that it's, got, the emotional flexibility to be in a Coen Brothers movie. It's something I like too. I enjoy it. I think it has a particular quality, like Miller's Crossing. That's an old tune called Limerick's Lamentation. That's the main theme in that. So I do enjoy that. And of course, a lot of composers, it's an old classical tradition and film music tradition too, to go back to something and work off of that. And I kind of do view it from a Darwinian sense. Those tunes can evolve and mutate and
endure.
Right.
But it's interesting because then you send it out into the world, and maybe as an audience ingesting, and I can trace back and discover it and kind of go back to the roots. And I love that kind of multiple layers of depth, so you can enjoy it outside the film and kind of research it more. So another film, I'm just kind of picking some Coens, but the Coen Brothers, but Raising Arizona was another, I think, such a perfect score. But I mean, and that was the second film. I mean, you went with yodeling and whistling, and I mean nobody in their right mind would have even thought that was like those were options, but you guys did it, and it worked so well. I mean, and it was funny because I was watching Rango recently, which is the animated film, and they definitely tempt you in there because there's But I mean that film. I mean, but talk about coming up with those unique ideas and finding those unique sounds, and what spawns those ideas in you. To find a yodeler.
Well, I mean, that one, honestly, Joel and Ethan, I think particularly Joel, had been an editor, a film editor before he made Blood Simple. So he was editing, at that point, early in their career, he was largely editing the films. And while he was editing Raising Arizona, he was listening to lots of different things. But as I say, one of the things they just listened to is folk music.
Right.
And there's this Pete Seeger medley called the Way Out There Suite that he was listening to that basically is that's where those ideas come from. That was actually like their idea that Pete Seeger did this thing where he would yodel and he would whistle and he'd put in Beethoven's Ninth and he'd put in and he'd compiled all these different things, and the yodeling part is I guess from a Sons of the Pioneers song called Way Out There. And we were trying to find it because we like to properly credit
Absolutely,
where these things come from. So if it's not a folk tune, folk tunes you just say it's traditional, so you can't nail down a person. But this it was recorded by the Sons of the Pioneers, and we thought maybe we could find out who wrote it. But when we tracked that back, the trail went cold because the Sons of the Pioneers record says traditional. So it's history does not record who first yodeled those notes. But it was really Joel and Ethan's idea to work from that, and we had to find a yodeler. Which in some parts of the world be easier. In New York City, not as easy. I knew a Polish musician I worked with who was a yodeler. So first we brought in Miatek to try him yodeling, but his yodeling just had this Balkan quality that we couldn't it just never quite had sounded
Yeah.
Western,
Yeah,
never.
right.
So, so then we actually went to, I think there was a show on Broadway, a Mark Twain show on Broadway at the time. I forget what it was called, but anyway, there was a singer in that show. We just started asking around, and Joel, I think, through being married to Fran McDormand, had a pretty good collection of actors that they could investigate, and they managed to find this guy, an actual Okie, who could yodel, and he came in and he did. It was perfect. His fluidity and
It's amazing.
what have you.
It's so perfect.
But that's definitely, it's just our second film. We had like the banjo player was Joel Neeson's optometrist, the comb player and whistler is my Polish friend that I worked with. It was just whoever was at hand.
That's I don't know. That's like why I fell in love with filmmaking, and just gathering what you can, what's
Yeah,
around
exactly.
you, and just making it work.
That's right.
You don't have the resources, you don't have millions of dollars. You just go for it and just make what inspires you.
And I have to say, and I'll just say, at that point in my career, and in particular for that film, Morricone's spaghetti westerns were really an important inspiration.
Absolutely.
Because that was an example of, you've got 6 sounds that don't seem to have anything to do with each other, but you put them together and it's a very distinctive, thing. Not like anything else, and that was very inspiring to me.
Like a score like Navajo Joe, which is just like screaming and all this stuff. I mean, but it works.
Right. Yeah.
Those absurd ideas that it just works. And then at the other end of the spectrum, you guys did a film, No Country for Old Men, which was practically scoreless. There's only a few moments, and then of course the end credits suite. And I'm trying to the moments that I remember music is there's a scene where Anton is driving across a bridge and he shoots at a crow, and then when Llewyn Davis' body is found. Are those the only 2 scenes that have music?
No, there are more.
More?
One memorable one is in the memorable to me. I wouldn't blame anyone for not perceiving music in the movie at all, but the gas station scene where Javier Bardem's character flips a coin.
Yes, there is music there. I'm sorry.
There is, the trick with the music in that movie is, it's you never notice it appearing. It's like what we learned was that if you perceived score, it suddenly kind of let the air out of the balloon. The tension disappeared. So it's all just steady state sounds like sine waves and Tibetan singing bowls and things that you could just fade it up underneath the wind or the car or the sound of the tires on the pavement. Fade it up so you never perceive it. In the gas station, it comes up underneath like a combination of the wind and the 60 cycle sort of hum of things in the gas station. And in the gas station, what happens is it gets quite loud as you get to the coin flip, but again, you haven't heard it ever start. So it's kind of like the frog in the water where you slowly turn up the temperature and it never realizes that it's being cooked. And then when the coin is revealed,
Sucked out, right?
the music suddenly stops, and then you realize there was something there, some tension there, but you didn't notice it. So there's little tricks like that. But we, for reasons that are still, I think, hard to understand, anything that was perceived as score just made the movie worse.
It's weird because for me, when I hear music in a film, it lets me know that I'm watching a film. It's like, oh, you're being told a story. Right. And then by taking that out, it made even though the violence is so stylized in that movie, it made it so much more, I don't know, gritty and real, and terrifying. It was a terrifying, tense film.
That's right, exactly. And it is, that film is all tension. If you don't have tension, then there's nothing there. And the way you said it is exactly right. It seemed that when you heard score, you knew you were in a movie. But obviously, you're in a movie.
Exactly.
Right? It's not as though you don't know that you're in a movie, but still, the score affects your brain in some particular way that, for that movie, was not good. I don't know. I thought about it a lot, but I still don't really understand why there wasn't why score had that effect.
Yeah. But then you got to do an end credit suite, which I love, and I'm glad you put it on your site because I love that piece.
I love that piece too.
Yeah.
And so that was when we were trying to see if there was a way to have score in the movie. I actually began with that, with the percussion and stuff like that. I thought, well, begin with percussion. You know that would work against the guy walking on the this West Texas caliche, but We was never able to get it into the movie, but fortunately I got it into the end credits.
Yeah, that's great. It was perfect. So let's jump to another Western, of course, Buster Scruggs, The Ballad of Buster Scruggs, which is coming out on Netflix and in limited theatrical exhibition for a week or two. So I'm a huge Western fan, and I love that. I don't know. I always see Westerns when people might not see Westerns. Of course, even if maybe the filmmaker didn't intend it to be Western, I'm like, oh, there's so many Western sensibilities there. And I see Big Lebowski as a Western, of course, No Country, and even Fargo. But
Star Wars,
a Western in space. Pirates of the Caribbean, it's a Western. But like, anything's a Western. But for this one, it's an anthology. It's a movie made up a few stories. So talk about the approach here, and did Joel and Ethan tell you why they were kind of doing this a little different kind of a narrative structure, and how did it affect your process?
Well, they had a lot of these stories had been around a very long time, and so I knew that they had some of these stories sitting around. They looked over the years at different ways of getting them made. They didn't want to turn them into feature films, but they had these short stories, and in the end, I guess they got enough of them together to make an anthology feature film, and that's a format that appears occasionally in the history of filmmaking, but it's certainly never been that common, and it certainly isn't today. But they wanted to, see if they could, now they had this many Westerns. They didn't have the last one, but they had the first 5 together, and they thought that's enough to say we've got a project, and they knew they wanted to do one more. They didn't have a real ending yet. And so during that process, before they shot, but still during the process of pre-production, they finally got that last story together. But it wasn't, we didn't know for certain that it was going to be a single film. That was always a possibility, but I don't think Netflix really committed to that until they saw it, until we'd actually done all of our work.
I think when it was first announced, it was saying a miniseries or something.
Right, exactly,
like
because it was Annapurna's television division and Netflix, and so people certainly assumed that it was a television show. But I can't say that Joel and Ethan assumed that,
right.
But everyone else in the world did.
Exactly. Yeah.
And we talked about each chapter, we really just like one sentence to conversation about this, what would work here, this should be, what that should be, what that should be. But the big open question was, is there something that ties it all together? Is there some way to tie it all together? Like none of the stories have similar, there's no character that appears in them, there's no story element that appears. There's sort of they have 2 things in common. They all take place in the Old West, meaning like the sort of 1870s, post-Civil War, frontier period, and they all involve, as Joel put it, non-accidental death. All the stories have these things in common, and but that's it. So, in a way, they were relying, or they said they were hoping. They're not relying, but they were hoping that music would somehow, tie the room together.
Yeah, be the unifying thing.
Yeah,
all on your shoulders.
And when they came back from shooting, they were even more, determined that this would be true. So I spent, before I scored any of the episodes, I spent a lot of time just trying to find a thing that would tie them together, some theme. But they cut them in order. So they had the first one cut, which has hardly any score in it. That wasn't very helpful. And but the last one, which is the end of the movie, they didn't get that cut until we'd been working on it for a couple of months. And anyway, for a variety of reasons, it was very hard for me to even conceive what would tie it all together. But also just difficult at a musical level to come up with something. Every one of the stories is by design very different than the others. They take place. They look different. The story is different. The cutting is different. So in the end, I just completely failed in my assignment to find something that would tie them together. I did try, and that was the first thing I worked on. And at a certain point, I had to say, okay, I just give up because I've got to start actually writing the scores to the episodes, and I can't just work on this one, hypothetical problem for any longer. So the best I did was, in the very last story, Brendan Gleeson sings a song which is called "The Unfortunate Lad," and it's this British Isles folk tune that I think it even goes back to like the 18th century. There's evidence of it having existed then, different lyrics. But when it came over to the U.S., it became "The Streets of Laredo," which is a classic cowboy ballad. And so I basically took that tune and used it in the opening and the ending of the movie. When you see the book, The Ballad of Buster Scruggs, at the beginning and at the end, use that tune there. So there's at least a sense of sort of bookends and some sense of consistency. And the subject matter of the song is very appropriate to the film. It's about death, and a particularly off-color and an uncomfortable song about death. Because in that version that Brendan Gleeson sings, it's the guy has been killed basically by getting venereal disease from the woman that he loves. When it became Streets of Laredo over here, it changed, but that's what it was in its older form. So anyway, that at least presents the premise of a theme.
Yeah. So yeah, congrats on Buster Scruggs. It's such a perfect, Carter Burwell, Coen Brothers project, and it's on Netflix, which is, Netflix is, and not just Netflix, but Amazon and all the other streaming services, HBO, are kind of becoming this haven for all our auteur filmmakers and creatives. As the superhero movies have dominated, cineplexes and cinemas and the tent poles and all that. What is your take on that? Kind of, I always see it as like kind of the disappearing of the middle class, kind of coming to TV and streaming. And we talked about at the beginning of the interview a little bit about the importance of getting all this right for people working like you who are in this and making your living from it. But what is your take on this kind of new frontier of entertainment?
Well, it's always good when someone is willing to put up the money to make interesting movies.
Yeah.
And throughout the period that I've been working on this, there's always someone who shows up. It'll be like at one point it was like, hedge fund people who want, who have bunch of extra, millions and just want to get into the glamour of it, or it's, this. If you keep looking, you'll find someone who will fund your movie. Anyway, Joel and Ethan have been fortunate enough to find that, and it comes from all these different sources. But in this case, right now, because of their completely different business model, Netflix and Amazon are funding the making of a lot of feature films, and feature films, as you say, that would have had a harder time, maybe would not have been possible to fund in a theatrical context, like Buster Scruggs. I can't really imagine that it would have been easy to get the money to do this if it was just for theatrical release. Right. So, yeah, that's a fantastic thing. I saw Roma, the Alfonso Cuarón film, and it's just incredible. It's a fantastic film. And again, you could imagine maybe some European money making that movie, but I can't imagine anyone in the U.S. putting up the money for that. Right. Absolutely brilliant film. So I think that's great. Where it leads, no one can say. I'm sure that the people at those companies have some idea of a roadmap that they're hoping for, and of course all the traditional studios are trying to map that out for themselves too now. And it seems like where we're going to end up with is a whole bunch of streaming services, each with their own libraries. Yep. And then what's going to happen next is then, because no one's really going to want to subscribe to 12 streaming services, it's just going to be like cable again, where you choose a package of streaming services.
And you're paying the same amount a month again.
So it'll be the same thing. But still, the long tail, as I say, of having these films available to be watched when you want, forever. That's an amazing thing. it hasn't, like I say, that is not actually what's happened, but
Right.
that concept,
Concept.
is a wonderful concept, and
Yes.
if we can get there, it will, it will be a great thing.
And shown in the best format possible in 4K and Dolby Vision and all this Atmos
Right.
sound, so it's great.
I mean, the alternative is what's going to happen is it's all going to become more balkanized, and you'll own on Netflix. You'll just see Netflix productions, and
Yeah.
on Amazon you'll see Amazon productions, and on Warner Brothers you'll Warner Brothers productions, and Disney you'll see, and that there may still be you'll never know where to go to see Fargo or
Because who owns the rights at this point? And,
or The Searchers or something these classic films. You'd love to think that they're always available to be seen when you want to see them. It's not necessarily going to end up that way, but
Right.
that's a dream. That for me, that would be the dream.
Yeah, I'm still a disc person. I'm still buying Blu-rays, so I'm one of the last people. I mean, I stream.
Me
but,
too.
Yeah.
And I still have the Netflix DVD subscription, because even though their collection of films you can see on Netflix is not that great, obviously they're wonderful films like the Ballad of Buster Scruggs, but you think of some classic film you want to see, it's probably not
exactly.
there. But their DVD version is. They still
Right.
have a ginormous
Huge collection, right,
DVD
yeah.
collection, and so I still take advantage of it for that. You just have to wait a couple days.
Yeah.
But but yeah, that's right. On discs, you still have the world at your
Absolutely.
available to you. And that's, I think, one of the people are wondering what to make of Filmstruck, shutting down.
Right.
And, I read one, I forget where it was, but one possible analysis was, yeah, classic movies maybe are always meant to be on DVD. If it's a thing you actually want to see more than once, maybe you should just buy the disc.
It's true, especially for that that kind of that audience, because that audience, that's the audience I think that buys discs for the presentation.
Yeah, that's me. Yeah.
And when Filmstruck came out, I mean, I work at Cartoon Network Studios, so it's a Turner company, and I remember when they rolled it out, and it was exciting, but I was like, I'm not going to sign up for this, and this is meant for me, I'm going to still go buy the Criterion discs. And so I think eventually they have the idea for their big Warner Media streaming service. They might roll that into that. I don't know, but we'll see.
We will see.
We will see. So to kind of wrap things up a little bit, I just want to touch on a few more directors that you work with that I really love. Martin McDonagh who's one of my favorite writers and directors working today, and Three Billboards was a movie that, I mean, really personally affected me. I don't know, it was my favorite. I gave it to you. It was my favorite score of the year on my site that year, and I interviewed him, and he was really. He told me that he's a playwright, so he's from the writing background, and so it was like he told me he kind of lets you loose, and he's like, I'm just gonna give him a little bit of direction and go. Was that accurate?
That's really true. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. On Three Billboards, I had to actually come back to him. It was kind of embarrassing because I had to go back to him and say, Martin, I can't figure this one out. Can we just talk about what this movie's really about? Because that's right. He just lets me go, and because I've worked on all his features,
Yeah.
That's just the method he wants to, he likes to use. Three Billboards was harder for me to find, I have to say. But that, for all the reasons that it's a good movie, it just covers so much material,
Yeah.
and the characters are so true but unpredictable, and the alliances and the plot is so unpredictable. You don't know where it's going. It just made it hard for me to say, well, what's my role here, really? But yeah, that's right. Martin pretty much leaves me to my devices.
And I mean, In Bruges and Seven Psychopaths 2 are also fantastic. It was really funny because when I was talking it was a phone interview. He was doing it from some cafe that I was able to just pin him down for 15 minutes. And I'm like, suicide is a big theme in your films. And he's like, is it? And he realized, it's like, oh yeah, somebody commits suicide in every film. And it's like, so when he was finding these, like, I made him realize that. But what about his writing? I mean, not just his writing, but I guess, and apply this, I guess, to any of your projects. Where does the first note come from? I mean, what is for you something that you latch onto? Do you like to wait for the first cut? Do you like to read the script? Do you like to visit the set? I mean, what's the kind of the first part of your process? I'm sure it probably is different on every film, but is there something that you tend to lean towards that kind of gets you going?
Well, I always read the scripts, partly just because I like scripts. I think screenplays are an interesting medium, but it also, if it's a director that I haven't worked with before, the script helps me to know if it's something I won't even want to do. So that helps me decide whether I'm saying yes or no. But I don't typically write any music until I see the film because there's so many different ways to shoot a script. I mean,
Yeah.
I know that there are some directors who ask, the composer to do something beforehand, and that's fine. But I know that if I did that, and no one has asked me for that, but if I did that, I know that whatever I did, I would end up throwing out because it's just true that when I see the colors and I see the cutting and the framing and all that stuff really affects my feelings about the movie that then affect the music that I'm going to write for it. So that's when I write the first notes. After I've seen some cut of the film, usually my process is I see it with the director. I then we may have some brief conversation, or maybe
Right.
not, and I then go away and basically I ask myself the question: what's missing in this movie? What can music bring that isn't there? Like in Bruges, I felt that there was this fragility and innocence to the characters that they're hard men, but what's interesting is they have no tools to face the existential issues they're facing, and I thought they were so sweet, and I
Right.
thought there was actually a sweetness and gentleness
That piano
that
theme,
would
that-
make
yeah.
make the movie even more painful. But anyway, I try to come up with that. I ask myself that question: what's the thing that's missing? And when I have a conceptual response to that, I then sit at the piano, typically not with the movie, and explore ways to approach that. Like what could be the musical answer to that question? And then when I have something I think is promising there, then I go turn on my computer and get the film up and put it against the picture and try out different instrumentation and things like that. And that's the way that I typically work. It doesn't have to be that workflow, and that workflow does to some extent, dictate the type of music you're going to write. For instance,
Right.
If you work that way, I could never do of the score to No Country for Old Men because piano is never going to lead you to the answer for that
Right.
movie. So there are types of scores where if they're more like sound design based, more sonic based, sitting at the piano is not going to be that helpful. But when it is something that's going to involve melody, harmony, things like that, the piano is where I'm most comfortable. And I love the fact that it doesn't have an on-off switch. That when I have to turn it on, then I feel like I'm working.
Yeah.
If I just sit at the piano, then I'm feeling like I'm having fun.
Yeah. And the thing that I love about your music and I use the word, and a lot of people might see it negative, but I think it's the most positive thing is its simplicity and just the way you do theme and variation, and you hone in.
Who thinks that's a negative? I want some names.
When people say simple, people are like, oh, it's simple and easy. But it's like, I think it's so much harder to do that. And you can have an 80-piece orchestra and really like throw stuff that isn't there, but to try to navigate and find something that isn't there. Something like Carol, which I loved your score for Carol. I thought it was so good. And yeah, I'm just rambling about your music, but that's what.
No,
how
I
take
agree.
It
It is
Yeah.
simple. I completely agree. I think that is right. I'm a simple composer, and yeah, that's right. I mean, that's part, and it's just true.
And talking about another director that you work with, another favorite of mine, of course, Spike Jonze, which he's a local hero of mine because he's from Maryland. So, but the films that you've done together, I think Where the Wild Things Are, like the ending makes me cry like every time. It's just because then when you realize it's really about his marriage, his parents breaking up and all that stuff. But working with Spike is known for, of course, his music videos, of course. So he has a musical ear, he has a musical eye, or editing eye, an eye for editing. What kind of director is he? Is he more involved in score because he works with musicians more, or is he, when it comes to score, which is different than a music video, but what kind of director is he?
Well, my experience with them have all been so different, honestly.
The films have been very different.
What's that?
All the films
they're
have been
very
very
different. And on Being John Malkovich, that was Spike's first feature, and I think he was counting on me to kind of educate him about what music would do. He could have gotten, any pop band to do the music for that movie, but he wanted to know what film score does for a movie. He specifically wanted to go that direction. And so that was, we had many conversations, but he really, I did feel like, I don't think Spike would disagree, that it felt sometimes like more like I was giving him a class in, film scoring. This is what score can do, as opposed to songs, and adaptation, that was more like a puzzle, a weird puzzle, because that film could probably have worked without score, or the film has so many, also it misleads you in various ways, right? What's going on, and then in the last part becomes like this fake thriller, and that's a very odd one. And I mean, we talked a lot about it again, but I don't think it was definitely very much a path of exploration, like saying, well, we could do this, we could do this, we could do this. We tried different things, different places. Then on Where the Wild Things Are, he began by thinking that it should just be songs. So he didn't talk to me really. I mean, we talked. He just to let me know he wants Karen O to do the songs, and wasn't going to be any score. And it was only after they had shot it that they began to see that there were things that songs couldn't do. There were, again, like certain things that score can do in terms of drama, emotion, that aren't as well served with songs. So I came in basically to patch up, fill in like this area or that area. And Karen and I worked on some things together to try to like keep it as seamless as we could. But so my experiences with Spike were all just kind of very different. But he's an amazing filmmaker. I miss that he hasn't made a feature film in a while.
It's been a while.
He's of course doing other things, but I do miss his voice.
You see his Apple commercial?
It's
so great.
Oh, yeah.
It's so creative. But when you work on something, the creative process, of course, sometimes you come to disagreements, and it will happen on films, maybe more so on like a big studio feature when things have to form a brand feel, maybe like on a Disney movie, of course, like you did with Goofy Movie and Finest Hours, or in some case, like with Thor, because you were supposed to do Thor 2, and that didn't, creative differences happen. So when things like don't go, when there's different opinions, how do you work through? And if it doesn't happen, of course, it doesn't happen, but how do you kind of get to that point where, do you have to compromise? Do you have to, at the end of the day, you're, I guess, working for the director, but I mean, how do you communicate with directors maybe that you don't have a relationship like Joel and Ethan,
Well, I'll preface this by saying that, ideally for me, each film is its own little world. And ideally the music is its own little world too. And so in order to, support that concept, when I work with a new director, I try to just go with that director's approach. I'm not going to say I think I know better, because I want this film to be its own world, a new thing, and if I have to work in some new way, that's fine. That might be the way that we get to this new world. So I try to always give the director the benefit of the doubt, always. I would never say, I think this guy's completely wrong. So even if that's the method, I'm a very methodical, for instance, person and composer, and so I work sometimes with directors who are like the total opposite of that and just like to have total chaos. I find that difficult, but again, if that's going to get us to the film we want it to be in the end, maybe that's the right approach. But sometimes, we get to the point where it's just not working, right? Mm-hmm. We're not finding music that we can all agree about. It's that
it literally is creative differences.
Exactly. That happens, and it's I think in those situations it's usually best if you really just can't find a thing, if nothing's come up that is working. For me, it is best to just say, we should move on. You should get somebody else. There are other approaches. You could say, well, let's look at what you have for temp score, and we'll just try to make something that sounds like that. But why would I want to spend my time doing that?
Exactly.
So that's not something I would do. And I've worked on films which were like that, where the temp became the Bible of the film, and then I just tell them, you should just license that temp. It's not, I'm not going to copy it, and it's not, it's not what I want to spend my life doing, or even this week doing. So, so yeah, there's a lot of ways in which it can fall apart, and it does. That definitely happens.
Yeah.
And I've been called on to rewrite, films, or we do new scores for films. And people have been called on to do new scores for films that I've composed. That's
you were supposed to do Born, I think, wasn't it? You were supposed to do the first Born.
Yeah, I got pretty well into it, but Doug and I could never. That's an example where I didn't feel we ever had a clear conversation. I didn't feel like we ever were really communicating about it. I didn't feel like. I love the film. I still love the film, but I didn't feel like he was getting what I was doing, and I didn't feel like I understood what he was saying, and it was just an odd thing.
Yeah,
Happens.
it happens, and then I talked to a lot of composers about the rejection of part of the business, but then it's everyone's trying to service the film, and there's other fish in the sea.
Well, also, it takes 100 people to make a film.
Oh, yeah.
It's not always, not all of those people are going to work together appropriately. That's right. It's just that's the way that it is, and it's just that's. You go back as far as you want. That story keeps reappearing in this business because there's just so many people involved.
Oh,
And to figure out who's even in charge or whose criteria are the defining ones is sometimes who can even say. Who knows?
Especially on those bigger ones. You were on Twilight, one of the biggest franchises. But you had a great experience on that of being able to start and finish that. So that was fantastic.
Yeah.
So kind of to end it, you've worked from, over decades in this business and kind of experienced it all, done all these different genres and seen kind of different trends coming and going. In 2018 now, looking at the film industry as it is today, what are some of the good things that you love, and what are some of the bad things that maybe you're seeing that are kind of bad trends?
It's happening right now?
Yeah, like right now in 2018.
Okay. Well, I think it's a good thing that we're in such a state of flux. Change is always good, I think, and we certainly have a lot of change going on. I think no one can really say what this industry is going to be like 10 years from now.
Absolutely.
No one knows, and that's pretty interesting. But I think that one of we already talked about the issue with rights
Streaming,
and copyright and all sorts of different rights. Composers have a lot of different rights in their work: performance rights, composition rights, recording rights, and that's always being challenged all the time. But now that things are changing so much, the challenges come from unpredictable sources. Always. No two contracts that I see are ever the same anymore. They're all like it's as though they figured out some new angle every time.
Yeah.
But that's not. I'm not saying that that's a bad thing, but it is. It's a threat.
Sure.
And it just needs to be. People need to be vigilant, I guess I'll say. I think one of the things that is difficult right now is. I'm in the Motion Picture Academy, and to the extent that the Academy Awards mean something, and I'm not going to say what that extent is, but to the extent that they do, they're facing an existential crisis right now. I don't think there's any question. I think they don't know. If a movie just shows on Netflix, is it a movie?
Right.
They don't have the answer to those questions, but they're going to have to answer those questions real soon, like in the next couple of years, and they face that. They face obviously the diversity issue that's been very well described. The problem's been described. The solution hasn't been.
Absolutely.
And they've been trying different solutions, but those things I think are. It's hard to know where that's going to go. It could be that the whole idea of an academy, which represents some standard of the art, can't be maintained when there is this much flux. It might be that that's just not. The group does seem kind of at a bit of a loss as to how to deal with all of these different issues at the same time.
It's trying to find their place kind of in this new yeah, in this new era. Because I mean, growing up, for me, I don't know. I feel like there's this disconnect with maybe younger generations. And I mean, I'm not old. I'm 31, but like I grew up watching. I'm so interested in about not just behind what filmmaking, like the art of it. I feel like when people say art, people go, oh, so pretentious, I have bills to worry about. Why am I worrying about art? I feel like, I don't know, is art like still treasured as much as it used to be? Like the artistic nature of things and what it means to like the human condition? I don't know, but I feel like that maybe has part of it to do. I mean, I still search for that, but I don't know if everyone does.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not even going to bite at that one, but yeah, there's I was becoming an aware film goer in the 70s when there was a particular period. It was kind of looking in retrospect, kind of a bubble, but this period when Hollywood was actually putting money into these auteur-driven films, and that's an extraordinary thing, but it's certainly not not exactly like that now, and maybe that was really just a bubble. That was some weird coincidence that the people who happen to be running some studios like Paramount happened to want to do that.
But I think it's coming back, and I think to tie it nicely is that Netflix and streaming services are bringing a platform for our auteur filmmakers. I mean, I'm not just like saying that facetiously. I think there's so much great content on there, and that's where these.
Well, that's true. And what happens is because there's no box office number
exactly
on Netflix or Amazon, it's not so they must have some way, I'm sure, to do the math to decide whether what they're doing works for them. But it's not. There is no obvious like profit and loss to films because of their business model. They can't say this film lost money. They can't say this one made money.
Right.
They have no idea. They must know their viewership numbers, but they can't really say how that contributes to subscriptions and things like that.
Exactly.
So that means that there's the possibility that because each film doesn't have its own like little spreadsheet, that you could have more variation, more diversity in the types of films that are made and what have you, and there would be room for more interesting films. That's right. Yeah.
Absolutely. Well, Carter, I want to thank you so much for your time today. This has been such a blast and just so engaging and interesting. So thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate it.
It's my pleasure.